James Okafor had built an empire from the ground up. As the CEO of one of the most successful real estate firms, he was admired and respected. From dawn until late at night, his schedule was packed with board meetings, business deals, and high-stakes negotiations. He had no time for distractions, including his 15-year-old son, Daniel. Daniel had once idolized his father, longing for his attention. But over the years, James had grown distant, prioritizing work over family. "I'm doing this for you," James would always say whenever Daniel asked him to attend a school event or spend the weekend together. The boy eventually stopped asking. At home, Daniel's only company was a house filled with expensive furniture, housekeepers who obeyed his every command, and a mother who tried her best but couldn't replace the father he craved. His mother, Amaka, often argued with James about spending more time with their son, but James always dismissed her concerns. One evening, Daniel sat alone in the massive living room, scrolling through his phone while his father was away on yet another business trip. A notification popped up from a classmate, inviting him to hang out after school. It wasn't the first time, but Daniel had always hesitated. This time he typed, "I'll be there." Unbeknownst to him, this small decision would lead him down a path that would change his life, and his father's, forever. James returned home late that night, exhausted but satisfied. Another deal closed. More money in the bank. As he loosened his tie and poured himself a drink, Amaka stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. "Did you even ask about Daniel today?" she asked. James sighed. "Amaka, I don't have time for this. I'm working hard for our future." "Our future or your ego?" she shot back. "Do you even know what's happening in his life?" "He's slipping away, James." James took a deep breath. He hated these conversations. "He's fine. He has everything a boy could want: money, comfort, the best school." "But he doesn't have you," she said, her voice softer now. "James, please. He needs his father." James didn't respond. Instead, he finished his drink and walked away. He didn't know that at that very moment, his son was meeting with a new group of friends. Friends who thrived in the shadows of the city, where fast money and dangerous thrills ruled. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt seen. And he liked it. Daniel felt the rush of excitement as he walked into the dimly lit gaming center, where his classmates were waiting. At the center of the group was Toby, a 16-year-old boy who was known for skipping school and living recklessly. He was the kind of person Daniel's parents warned him about, but tonight, Daniel didn't care. "Daniel, you finally showed up," Toby grinned, slapping his back. "Welcome to the real world." The boys played video games, joked around, and for the first time, Daniel felt like he belonged. He stayed out longer than he should have, ignoring his mother's calls. By the time he got home, it was after 9 p.m. Amaka was waiting, her arms folded. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "Out with friends," Daniel said, brushing past her. "James, say something," Amaka called as her husband walked into the room. James barely looked up from his phone. "He's back home, isn't he? Let him be. He's a boy growing to be a man." Amaka sighed. She knew then that something terrible was coming. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's new friendships deepened. Toby introduced him to a new kind of life, one filled with parties, fast money, and a disregard for authority. At first, Daniel was hesitant, but the thrill was intoxicating. One afternoon, Toby handed him a wad of cash. "Easy money, bro. You in?" Daniel hesitated. "Where did you get this?" Toby smirked. "Does it matter? If you want to keep up, you better start making real money too." Daniel pocketed the cash. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change his life forever. Daniel knew he couldn't let his mother see the money. He hid it inside an old shoebox in his wardrobe and acted normal. But as he sat at the dinner table that night, his hands felt sweaty, and his heart raced whenever his mother looked at him. Amaka frowned. "Are you okay, Daniel? You're barely eating." "I'm fine," he mumbled, pushing his food around his plate. James, as usual, was too busy scrolling through his phone to notice the tension. "I have a meeting in Abuja next week," he announced, more to himself than anyone else. "Big investors." Amaka sighed. "You're always traveling, James. Your son needs you." "He has you," James replied absent-mindedly. Daniel clenched his fists. His father never noticed anything about him. Maybe that's why he didn't feel guilty about lying to them. If they didn't care, why should he? That night, he texted Toby. "I want in. Tell me what to do." The next day after school, Daniel met with Toby and his crew. They led him to an uncompleted building where a group of older boys sat around with laptops. "This is how we make real money," Toby said, pointing at the screens. "Online scams. No stress, just cash." Daniel hesitated. "Isn't this illegal?" Toby laughed. "Illegal? Bro, this is survival. These foreigners have too much money anyway." The older boys laughed, and one of them, a guy called KC, tossed Daniel a phone. "Send this message to the number I give you. If they reply, we continue from there." Daniel stared at the phone. His heart pounded, but he didn't back down. He wanted to prove himself. "Okay," he said, typing the message. It was his first step into the dark world of cybercrime. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became more involved in the scam business. He learned how to create fake identities, trick unsuspecting victims, and move money through secret accounts. The money flowed in quickly. He started dressing differently, expensive sneakers, designer shirts. His mother noticed. "Where are you getting all this, Daniel?" Amaka asked one evening, eyeing his new clothes. "I'm doing business," Daniel replied casually. Amaka's heart sank. "What kind of business?" James, who had just walked in, barely looked up. "Leave him, Amaka. The boy is becoming a man." Amaka stared at her husband in disbelief. "James, something is wrong." James sighed. "You're always worrying over nothing. He's fine." But Daniel wasn't fine. He was falling deeper into a life he wasn't ready for. And his parents were too distracted to notice. One night, Amaka decided to go through Daniel's room. She found the shoebox filled with money. Her hands shook as she counted the cash. This wasn't pocket money. This was serious money. She waited until James got home. "We need to talk," she said, placing the money in front of him. James frowned. "Where did you get this?" "From our son's room." James finally looked up. "Daniel, come here." Daniel entered the room casually. "What is it?" His father held up the money. "Explain this." Daniel's heart raced. But instead of fear, he felt anger. "Why do you care now? You're never around." James was taken aback. "That's not the point." "No," Daniel interrupted. "You don't get to act like a father only when it's convenient for you." James opened his mouth, but had no response. For the first time, he realized that his absence had created a son he didn't even know anymore. James clenched his fists, staring at his son. "Where did you get this money, Daniel?" Daniel folded his arms. "I told you, I'm doing business." Amaka stepped forward. "What kind of business gives a 15-year-old this much money?" Daniel smirked. "The kind that works." James slammed his hand on the table. "Don't play smart with me, boy. Are you stealing? Doing fraud?" Daniel scoffed. "You wouldn't know, Dad. You're never home to see anything." His words cut James deep. He had no response. Amaka's eyes filled with tears as she turned to her husband. "This is your fault, James. You abandoned him." James sighed and rubbed his temples. "Daniel, whatever you're doing, stop it now." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Or what? You'll ground me? You don't even know how to be a father." With that, he walked out, leaving his parents in stunned silence. Daniel continued his scam business, growing more confident. With each new victim, he made more money, and his reputation among the gang grew. Toby introduced him to more experienced Yahoo boys, who showed him how to launder money and avoid getting caught. One evening, Casey handed him a new phone. "This is your work phone now," he said. "Keep it with you at all times." Daniel felt invincible. But the excitement would be short-lived. The deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. He was now a part of a world that wasn't just about money, it was about survival. And one mistake could cost him everything. As Daniel's involvement in the world of cybercrime deepened, so did the danger. His newfound friends, Toby, Casey, and the others, had already seen their fair share of trouble. They were seasoned in the underworld, and they knew how to cover their tracks. But Daniel, despite his growing skills, was still a 15-year-old boy with no real understanding of the consequences. One day, Daniel got a call from Casey. The voice on the other end was urgent, and Daniel could hear the tension in Casey's words. "Daniel, listen carefully. We have a problem. One of our targets contacted the authorities." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "We're in deep trouble, man. The cops are onto us. We need to lay low." Panic gripped Daniel. He had never imagined that things could go this far. His head spun as he tried to process what Casey was saying. "What do I do?" Daniel asked, his voice shaky. "You need to get out of the city. Lay low for a while. I'll contact you when it's safe." "Casey, what's happening?" Daniel repeated. "What if they find us?" Casey's voice softened. "If they find us, we're done. Just get out of the city. Do it now, Daniel." Daniel didn't think twice. He grabbed his things and snuck out of the house. He wasn't sure where to go, but he knew he had to disappear for a while. The adrenaline coursed through him as he hailed a taxi to take him to a place he could hide. He stayed with a friend in a small town outside the city for the next few days, disconnected from his family, trying to avoid being noticed. But the fear gnawed at him. Every time a car passed by, he wondered if it was the police. Every time his phone rang, he feared it might be someone from the authorities. The isolation was suffocating. Meanwhile, back at home, his parents had no idea where he had gone. Amaka had been frantic when she discovered Daniel missing. She called James, demanding that he do something. But James was too busy with his work to even think about what was happening at home. "James, do you understand what's going on? Our son is gone," Amaka cried, pacing around the house. "I'll call his friends. He'll come back soon enough." James replied dismissively, his mind preoccupied with business deals and meetings. But Amaka wasn't convinced. She knew something wasn't right. Daniel had been acting out for weeks, and now he had disappeared without a trace. Desperate, Amaka reached out to the police. She couldn't shake the feeling that her son was in danger. She didn't know what he was involved in, but she had an unsettling sense that his disappearance wasn't just a typical teenage rebellion. The police launched an investigation, and within hours, they tracked down Daniel's last known location to the small town he had been hiding in. They arrived just in time to stop a major operation involving Toby and the others. The net was closing in on the whole gang. Daniel's heart pounded as he stood by the window of his hiding place, watching the police cars pull up outside the building. His phone buzzed. It was Casey. "They found us, man. They're coming for you." Daniel panicked, grabbing his things and trying to find an escape route. But it was too late. The police were already at the door. As Daniel was arrested and taken away, he couldn't help but think about the mess he had created. He had been reckless, too focused on the rush of quick money and validation from his friends. And now he was paying the price. Back home, Amaka broke down when the police called her. "Ma'am, we've found your son. He's safe, but he's in police custody. He'll be charged for his involvement in a cybercrime syndicate." James was stunned. He couldn't believe it. His son, the boy he had neglected for years, was now in trouble with the law. He rushed to the police station, but by the time he arrived, his son's case had already been transferred to the state's detention center for questioning. The next few days were a blur for James and Amaka. They met with lawyers and tried to figure out how to get Daniel released. The guilt weighed heavily on James. He had ignored his son for so long, and now it was too late to undo the damage. When James finally stood face to face with his son in detention center, the pain in Daniel's eyes was palpable. "You did this to me," Daniel muttered, his voice cold. "You were never there. You didn't care." James felt his heart shatter. His son was right. He had been too absorbed in his work, too blind to see what was happening in his own home. "I'm sorry," James said, his voice trembling. "I was wrong. I should have been there for you." Daniel shook his head. "It's too late for that, Dad." The words stung, but James knew that his son was right. He had failed him. Over the next few weeks, James and Amaka used their wealth and connections to navigate the complex legal system, ensuring that Daniel's trial, though harsh, was not as devastating as it could have been. While many in his situation would have faced the full weight of the law, Daniel's privileged background secured him a significantly reduced sentence. Instead of spending years behind bars, he was sentenced to just 2 months in prison, a punishment meant to serve as a lesson rather than total condemnation. However, even after his release, life would never be the same. The stigma of his actions followed him everywhere. His once bright reputation was now tainted, and whispers of his past mistakes lingered in every conversation. His parents, determined to reform him, placed him under strict supervision. He was grounded indefinitely, his movements closely monitored, and he was enrolled in private counseling to help him process his experiences and choices. Returning to school was no easier. The weight of his actions, combined with the judgment of his peers and teachers, made every day a struggle. No matter how much his parents tried to shield him, Daniel had to live with the consequences of his actions. A harsh reminder that privilege could soften the blow, but it could never erase the scars. But something inside Daniel changed. The reality of his situation hit him hard. He had been given a second chance, an opportunity to make things right. And despite the anger he felt toward his parents, a part of him wanted their support. He just didn't know how to ask for it. James, too, had changed. He had learned the hard way that there was no amount of money or success that could replace his family. His empire felt hollow without his son by his side. James began spending more time with Daniel, taking him to counseling sessions and making an effort to be present in his life. It wasn't easy. The wounds were deep, and Daniel struggled to forgive him. But over time, their relationship began to heal. Daniel slowly started to rebuild his life. He enrolled in school again and focused on his studies. The world of cybercrime, once so alluring, felt like a distant memory. He had learned the hard way that the quick path to success often led to ruin. James, too, had learned a lesson. He became more involved in his son's life, not just as a provider, but as a father. He didn't have all the answers, but he was there, every step of the way. The road to redemption was long, but James and Daniel walked it together. They knew that the past could never be erased, but the future was still theirs to shape. And for the first time in years, James felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could still be the father his son needed. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to embrace the opportunity for change. He threw himself into learning about the tech industry, diving into coding, software development, and the potential for innovation. He found joy in the challenge, something he had never truly experienced in his previous line of work. There was no rush, no adrenaline from evading the law or breaking barriers with shady deals. Instead, it was a different kind of rush, one that came from creating something meaningful from scratch. James, too, was changing. His commitment to his family grew stronger, and with each day he spent helping Daniel, he realized how much he had missed out on over the years. He had been too absorbed in his career, his business, and in the relentless pursuit of success. Now, the most important thing in his life was making up for lost time with Daniel. He no longer saw his business empire as the pinnacle of his existence. He saw his relationship with his son as the true measure of his success. They both began to carve a new life. For James, this meant rediscovering his role as a father, being present, listening, and learning about the son he had neglected for so long. For Daniel, it meant redefining his identity, not as the rebellious youth who had fallen into the wrong crowd, but as someone capable of contributing to society, of making a real difference. It wasn't easy for either of them. There were still moments of doubt, times when they both questioned whether they could ever fully move past the pain of the past. But they were determined to try, together. Daniel's progress was gradual but significant. As he started speaking at local schools, sharing his story of redemption, he could see the impact he was having. The young people in the audience related to his struggles, his mistakes, and his journey toward redemption. He became a symbol of hope for them, proof that it was possible to change, to rebuild, and to find a new path. The nonprofit Daniel started became the foundation of his work, not just helping young people stay away from crime, but also equipping them with skills in technology, mentorship, and guidance. He wanted to offer them the opportunities he had once denied himself, a chance to realize their potential before falling into the same traps he had. With James's business connections and financial support, Daniel turned his vision into reality, providing scholarships and internships to deserving youth. Now a certified robotics engineer after studying abroad, Daniel had graduated and, at just 23 years old, was thriving as the CEO of a fast-growing tech startup. Yet, despite his success, there were moments when his past mistakes haunted him, when the weight of his actions felt unbearable. But each time that darkness crept in, he thought of his father, how far they had come, and the trust they had rebuilt. James, too, was haunted by his past mistakes, especially the years he had missed. He knew he could never undo how he had let ambition blind him to his family's needs, but he was determined to make things right. He had long since scaled back his business dealings, and though his company still thrived, his focus had shifted to something more meaningful: his son, their relationship, and the future they were building together. Their bond grew stronger with time. James realized that being a father wasn't just about providing material wealth or securing a successful future for his child. It was about presence, love, and guidance. Daniel, in turn, learned to forgive, not just his father, but himself. The guilt he once carried began to fade as he focused on making a difference in the present. Eventually, Daniel's efforts gained national recognition. He was invited to speak at conferences and youth outreach programs, his transformation serving as an inspiration to many. He had gone from being a cautionary tale to a beacon of hope, someone who had been lost but found his way back and determined to give back to his community. James, though still involved in his company, found joy in attending these events with his son. Watching Daniel speak, seeing him stand tall and confident, filled him with pride. Together, they had built something greater than either of them could have done alone. Their story was no longer just about redemption. It was about purpose, second chances, and the power of a father and son healing together.